Murder Drones is an amazing story, but it's one that people consistently describe as hard to understand or follow. My name is Deepcut, robots call me DroneCut, and today we're going to break down every episode of this limited series for our final Murder Drones video. Episode 1 was, in many ways, the darkest episode of Murder Drones, giving us a really bleak world for the characters to live in without much hope for things getting better. The story opened with Uzi explaining how she and the other drones came to live in the bunker on Copper 9. Some time ago, the drones were brought to Copper 9 in order to do the mining work for the humans, presumably sending the copper back to Earth and other colonies that we learn about after they've either run out of copper on Earth or have decided to preserve the Earth's resources. At some point, however, the humans accidentally blow themselves up according to Uzi, leading to the drones being free. Without any connection to what's going on back on Earth, however, the drones believe that the humans became upset to the idea of runaway drone technology, and thus sent the disassembly drones to destroy them. At this time, the disassembly drones of N, V, and J needed the oil of other drones in order to cool down and survive. This was a smart plan that would have had the disassemblers wipe out all of the drones on Copper 9 before overheating and dying themselves. However, this was apparently dropped in later episodes, with there being no concern about N's need for cooling oil, though Uzi and Dahl would still apparently require it themselves as their absolute solver began to take over. Uzi explains how they have been safe behind 3 doors since the initial carnage of the invasion, but now she wants to go out and fight the disassemblers herself. While giving this presentation, Uzi makes a joke about them basically waiting for an inciting incident, a common term in different story formulas, such as with the hero's journey that we see in Uzi's PowerPoint on the wall. The hero's journey is perhaps the most common formula in the world, making a complete loop where a character first questions where they are, goes out into the world to face its challenges, and ultimately returns successful to where they started with a deeper appreciation for what they had there. This was, of course, an important part of the final episode of the series, which ended with Uzi giving a similar presentation in class about everything that had happened in the show, and how she's come to not hate the bunker that they live in now that she's been able to explore the world outside. But first, the journey there was really traumatic. Uzi went into the world telling her father that she was doing a report on the doors that he had built, something she actually hates because she sees them as stopping her from seeing the outside world. Outside, however, there are only murderous fallen angel robots that want to eat her oil. Uzi, interestingly, had developed an ability to fight back thanks to watching some anime and developing her cool laser gun. Drones aren't pre-programmed with everything they need to know about their jobs, and instead are something of a blank slate when they are first booted up that has to watch other people work in order to understand what they need to do. This is so that drones can be trained to do very specific tasks, but it seems to take some time. When first booted up, drones appear as a training neural network, which have no arms or legs because they need to focus on observing before they can be functional or helpful as a worker drone. With that in mind, Uzi watching a lot of anime has led to her having the ability to do the crazy action and stunts that are seen in the shows. Just like a drone observing workers, Uzi observing anime has led to her calculating how to pull off those same feats with her own machinery. With these skills and her weapon, she is able to injure N, who ends up not being able to see who Uzi is and mistakes her for a fellow disassembly drone. Uzi uses this time to try and learn about the disassembly drones themselves and convince N that they can rebel against the humans who supposedly sent them. It raised the concern with the disassembly drones that the humans aren't going to be good to the team once they complete their mission, and that they were really sent there to just die after completing their mission to kill. Uzi ends up making it back to her base, but when N realizes that she is a worker drone, he goes after her. This leads to the dramatic moment where Uzi's father Khan is too scared to help Uzi when N has her against the wall, and he simply abandons her. This was the darkest moment in the show in my opinion, far darker than Uzi's transformation or any of the other horror-themed scenes. This scene showed a man abandoning his daughter, leaving her to die because he didn't know how to save her. He is given the option to use Uzi's gun, but he can't bring himself to do it. This was so devastating even the disassembly drone N couldn't handle it, and he ends up switching sides to work with Uzi. The episode ended with the seeming defeat of the bad drones, with the bully J getting her head blown off, but Uzi can't forgive her father and chooses to stay out in the wasteland of Copper 9 with N, to try and figure out what to do with the little piece she has managed to negotiate. Already, however, there is the hint of a greater threat, with Uzi getting a sudden glitch, later understood to be the absolute solver, suddenly activating after destroying J. This would lead to Episode 2. Episode 2, Heartbeat. Now, each episode of Murder Drones has a very distinct and isolated feel, each borrowing from different horror subgenres and films. Episode 2 takes us from the more generic opening of the show in the first episode to one that is a bit more like the famous film The Thing. Here, we have characters being slowly picked off by a mechanical monstrosity that is making itself bigger and more complex with each drone it can kill and assimilate. The episode first opens with N having a flash of his life before becoming a disassembler, being just another drone in some lavish mansion back on Earth, with the shadowy humans watching over them. Here we see V in particular is very different than she is on Copper 9, where she acts a lot more like the bully J. Here she is softer and even shy seeming, and drawing the affections of N. Here we also get our first glimpse of Tessa, who has returned with another drone from the dump named Sin. This was our introduction to Sin, not quite realizing what she really was at this point, just a cryptic figure who seemed so innocent she couldn't possibly be the one behind everything that was going to happen. After this flashback, we return to the present where V is chained up and acting unhinged as Uzi deals with the strange new glitches that she is experiencing. It's here that V lays down the groundwork for the idea that the story Uzi told in the pilot isn't exactly true, as the drones only assume that the humans blew themselves up when it's possible that the drones did it to them instead. Back in the bunker, we see what we will later learn is the Absolute Solver projecting images to lure drones into traps and make bigger and bigger monstrosities while trying to reconstruct J. While that is happening, we get glimpses into the lives of characters like Uzi's father Khan, who is having mixed feelings about what happened with Uzi and how her teacher is talking about her. We also get to see a bit more of Lizzie and, more importantly, a dramatic look into the life of Doll. Here, Doll explains that her parents were killed in front of her after being asked by Lizzie where they were. Lizzie reveals that she was well aware that her parents were dead, but that asking about where they were is part of the joke. Guys, Lizzie is savage. But she's also unfortunately dumb and vain, and because of that, after calling Doll an idiot, she is almost lured into the Absolute Solver's trap when she sees a projection of herself in the hallway. Lizzie is in love with herself, wants to let her in and see why she has this cool duplicate suddenly, but is ironically saved by Doll here, who uses her Absolute Solver, showing the audience that she has it too. Uzi and the gang, meanwhile, end up coming upon the Absolute Solver in the strange writings about it on the wall, where Uzi deduces that the Absolute Solver is a backup program that is reconstructing the disassembly drones and somehow has infected her. Here, the Absolute Solver reveals that this infection happened to Uzi not back in episode 1, but back when she was just an infant neural network, a drone baby basically. This gives Uzi the horrifying revelation that they are all just puppets with the Absolute Solver pulling the strings, guiding them into the situations that will be most beneficial to the Solver in the end. In the end, they defeat the Solver, even destroying its heart, but the black bubble that remains escaped, indicating that the Solver from J was still not entirely defeated. From all these horrifying revelations, Uzi becomes afraid of N, making them end the episode with Uzi going back to the bunker where she came and leaving N with V. After this, Uzi ends up meeting her dad and even hugs him, something he accepts, but something that is very complex for Uzi after she'd been abandoned by her dad in the previous episode. This isn't necessarily forgiveness, but it's Uzi wanting her dad in her life to some degree, which will come back to haunt her in episode 3. Before the episode ended, however, we got the revelation from Doll that her real goal is V. After saving Lizzie from the J-Solver's hologram, we see at the very end of the episode Doll sitting in the classroom alone, fixating on a photo she has of what appears to be V, who will later be confirmed to have eaten Doll's parents, perfectly leading us into episode 3. Episode 3, The Promting. Episode 3 is called The Promting and is based on horror films like Carrie, which ends with a giant massacre at the high school dance. The episode opens with the revelation that several high school drones have gone missing, and that they are being killed off by none other than Doll. Uzi, meanwhile, is hating being in school again, but suddenly realizes that the missing girls might relate to her disassembly drone conspiracy board. Uzi tries to add their missing posters to her conspiracy board, only to realize that her father has taken it and put it with the crazy writings of Uzi's mother, Nori, stuff that we won't get to see until the next episode. Khan doesn't want Uzi to end up going crazy like her mother seemed to, and pushes her to continue having a normal teenage life, including going to prom with Lizzie and Doll. Uzi manages to escape Doll's home where things are grossly out of place and even ends up finding N, and the two reunite before going to the prom, which is being crashed by V. V's plan was to pretend to befriend Lizzie and then kill all of her classmates at the prom when Lizzie lets her in. V is legitimately surprised by the praise from the crowd, however, and convinces herself not to kill everyone, even if just long enough to enjoy their praise, though she seems unsure of her real feelings, and it's the first clue that she could turn her back on her programming to be friends with Lizzie and the class. Doll was apparently aware of this entire plan, and she allowed it to happen so she could kill V herself at the prom, and even ends up killing a bunch of her classmates along the way. N and Uzi end up stopping her from killing V in an attempt to create peace between the drones, but Doll just ends up escaping. After the prom, the gang goes to search her home, where V admits that she was the one who ate Doll's parents and that she enjoyed it. Here, Doll tries to attack Uzi, who is rescued by her absolute solver. This turns out to be an ultimate good with Doll, who suddenly goes from trying to kill Uzi to wanting to share a cure for the absolute solver with her, insisting that Uzi's absolute solver is worse than hers. This ends with Doll continuing on her own path in a sort of second version of the story that we only get glimpses of through her, on a quest for the same information that Uzi and her friends are after, but in the shadows. Episode 4, Cabin Fever. Episode 4 was called Cabin Fever and is based on the cabin in the woods genre, including the film called Cabin Fever itself. The episode opened with Uzi talking to her father about the collapse of the Copper-9 core, as Uzi begins to examine the similarities between her and Doll's life that might have led to them both having the absolute solver. Through photos, she realizes that both she and Doll inherited strange skull collars from their mothers. Inside of the closet that Khan was hiding Nori's kooky writings, we see a photo of the two mothers as well as the fathers and other drones at a special cabin, just after the explosion of Copper-9. To get there, Uzi ends up having to orchestrate a field trip with her class outside of the bunker, guided by N and V, who are trying to maintain the friendship with the worker drones established in the previous episode. Because of that, Uzi feels isolated in this episode because of how busy N is with the other drones, though by the end of it, he will show that what he really wants is to spend time with Uzi. While the disassemblers are giving the tour, Uzi is investigating the camp and finds evidence of her mother's crazy writings. These writings predicted the coming of the eventual disassembly drones, as well as the absolute solver-looking abomination monsters, and something that Nori referred to as the Singularity Event. While in the cabin, she also finds a remote worker bug, which acts as a digital guide and key for human workers at the cabin, at least before the explosion of Copper-9 killed them all. Here, we see a glimpse of Doll's story as she watches Uzi pick up the bug, with Doll having wanted it for herself. Uzi, meanwhile, begins to have her shift into darkness, and as Doll suggested from the previous episode, her transformation is much more terrifying, being very physical. Uzi becomes a literal monster in this episode, growing demonic wings, and she somehow turns flying arrows into masses of organic tentacle-like matter. She begins attacking and picking off the other drones because of this transformation, and is only stopped in the end thanks to the disassembly drones like N. N, of course, ends up calming down Uzi, and she's able to get on the bus with everyone to return home, but the effects of the transformation are still shown to be there, with Uzi overheating quickly in the light. Another great part of this episode is the little interactions between Lizzie and V, where they butt heads a little, but it's clear that the two are getting closer, and Lizzie in particular is trying to appeal to V, it seems. Episode 5, Home. Episode 5 focused primarily on a sort of interactive flashback of N and V's time back on Earth, working in the mansion for the humans. In the episode, we would learn that N and V's memories were being remotely deleted, with Uzi trying to go into the memories herself in order to save them. This leads to the three of them all realizing what N and V had been through on Earth, but because they are digital memories, they become a bit interactive, with Uzi being able to enter them herself. This episode was important for introducing us to Sin as a character, where we can see that she is a broken drone that acts as if she's a step behind everyone else. However, by the end of the episode, we will learn that this isn't actually Sin, but the absolute solver, something hinted at the very opening moments of the episode. Before jumping into the memories of the characters, the episode starts with a segment from the zombie drones training tape that N had discovered at the camp in the previous episode. Here, it is explained that the proper disposal of drones is necessary to prevent unwanted boot-ups, which includes needing to disconnect the core where the absolute solver operates. Immediately after seeing this tape, we're taken to a scene where we see one drone in a pile of many, where on her arm it clearly indicates that she is CYN, or Sin. When Sin boots up, it's hard to read, but her screen has text for a split second that indicates that she needs help, and the Absolute Solver is offering to help, but needs Sin to relinquish control of her body by using a yes or no option. Following this, we cut to the memories of N and V and their time at the mansion, at a point where Sin has already been brought back from the dump by Tessa, and at a point where she seems to be pretty well integrated into life there. She is not quite functional the way N, J, or V, or any of the other service drones are, but she is allowed to move around the house when she is not being punished in the basement. In addition to Sin, we also learned a lot about Tessa here, who is different from the other humans, and that she actually cares about the drones as a whole. This is largely due to her being rejected by the other humans herself, being treated like a burden of a child instead of a member of the family. The drones operate on a level that Tessa is able to deal with, allowing her to be the leader of her little drone family instead of the outsider in her very real family. Around the home, we see the worker drones showing a 606 error, related to the worker drone 606 software that we saw in the worker drone's disposal tape. This doesn't appear to be literal, but rather it's part of the cryptic foreshadowing we see in these memories that indicate that everything isn't what it seems, that what we're seeing is from the limited perspective of characters like N, who imagine the other drones just working, and not quite noticing what's not right with how Sin has been changing things. The drones as a whole are treated as worse than servants, but more like burdens who need to be abused in order to properly train them, to remove the parts of them that are making the humans' lives so difficult. Sin at some point tries to stand up to this, but it just leads to N being tied up outside and Sin being thrown into the basement, where she already spends a lot of her time. Outside, N meets Uzi, who has taken the form of a crow. She informs him, and thus the audience, that these are just memories, and helps him escape so they can get back into the mansion and into the basement. In the basement, we learn that Sin has been spending a lot of time experimenting on drones, creating monstrosities, and even changing her own hardware to become a monster herself, one that is able to massacre all the humans at the fancy dinner party. It was here that she would also change J, V, and N into the disassembly drone monsters who can be seen destroying Earth in one of N's memories in a later episode. We would also see the depth of care that N had for V in this earlier time, where even when faced with his own destruction, he can't help but put V's glasses on her so she can properly see when carrying out the Solver's orders. In the end, Uzi is able to save them from being deleted in their memories, but the episode ends with the gang crossing paths with Tessa, who has seemingly come to Copper 9 in a spacesuit. During this episode, we also got more of the Doll story, with Uzi's adventure in N's memories being suddenly interrupted by Doll. Uzi's father had hilariously just let Doll in, and she ended up in battle with Uzi trying to get the bug remote that she was after in the previous episode. This seemed like the best time to grab it, but Doll walked away feeling worse about herself, realizing that Uzi was willing to give up her own chance at a cure in order to help N and V, two people who were responsible for so much of the pain in Uzi's life. With this remote, Doll was hoping to negotiate help from Tessa, including a ride off of the planet. However, this isn't how the story goes when everyone ends up crossing paths at the end of the episode. Episode 6, Dead End. After meeting Tessa and Jay at the end of the previous episode, everyone, except Doll, decides to team up and get to the basement that this bug remote is the key to. This basement is a secret lab that Tessa claims she wants to burn down because Sin is trying to get there, but already we start to see clues that this isn't really Tessa. She is shown as being bossy in such a way that even Jay doesn't recognize as Tessa-like behavior when she tells Jay to go guard her ship. Tessa seems to be purposely trying to make Uzi uncomfortable early on as well, and we see Uzi question if Tessa is really the one underneath that helmet when she looks into her reflection on it, reminding us that anyone could be underneath that suit. Uzi continues into the basement area with Tessa and the drones, but they all end up being captured by a rogue worker drone named Alice. Alice explains that she's been at this camp since the time before the explosion, where she was one of the numbered workers like Nori and Eva. She even describes Uzi's mother Nori, or number 02, as having left her and the others there to die after the explosion. Since then, she's managed to capture any Absolute Solver infected drones from the experiments that had been going on there, and put their cores inside of heated ovens so that they become sluggish and can't carry out Sin's plans. Alice sees Uzi as no different than an Absolute Solver infected drone, and refers to her as a witch, her term for drones who have Absolute Solver powers. Her solution for this is a giant magnet on the head of the drone, which disrupts the flow of the powers around the drone, making its powers practically useless. Tessa and N manage to escape from the baby drone named Bo that had been modified to be an assistant to Alice. Once free, Tessa reveals to N that the Earth has actually been destroyed by Sin, as well as other colonies of humans around in space, leaving Tessa as the only human left in existence, though of course we now know that this wasn't entirely the truth. While the Earth and other human colonies were seemingly actually wiped out, we would later learn that this isn't really Tessa at all, but that revealing the destruction of the Earth was just part of Sin's plan to help convince N that this really was Tessa. By giving N the truth of what Sin had done, it would hopefully make N want to side with Tessa against Uzi, who he knew was already slowly coming under the control of the Absolute Solver. This would play right into the real Solver's plans, however, which is largely to wipe out anyone that could be a threat to her so that she can have N alter herself. As Tessa, Sin would become the person that she believed was most important to N, but this entire episode becomes about how desperate the Absolute Solver is to convince N that Uzi cannot be saved, only to realize that Uzi has become more important to N than Tessa. After her Absolute Solver takes control and helps her defeat Alice, Uzi ends up making it to the elevator with N and the others, where they fall into a trap set by Doll. Doll has left herself out with an error message playing on her screen, giving the indication that she was hit by one of these Sentinel drones that exist around the camp to stop drones from getting into human-only areas. Lured in by the false sense of security, however, Doll reveals that she has hidden a bunch of these Sentinels in various rooms in the hallway, allowing her to sabotage everyone else and leave them to be boot-looped while she goes on to find a cure in the basement. Tessa tries to ward off the Sentinels by showing off some of her human blood, but this doesn't actually stop the Sentinels, once again hinting that despite the blood, this isn't really Tessa in the suit. Instead, V ends up sacrificing herself so that the others can get to the basement, with the last shot we see of her being the Sentinels coming in for the kill. Episode 7 is called Mass Destruction, and as the title suggests, it ends with a mass destruction of Copper 9 as we previously knew it. To start, however, we get the first in a series of flashbacks explaining what actually went on in the basement below the Copper 9 camp. Deep in the past, we see that this was once a secret operation by the humans of Copper 9 to try and stop the Absolute Solver from destroying their colony. The Earth and the other human colonies had already been destroyed by the Absolute Solver, and it was believed that finding a way to infect drones with this in order to devise a cure would be the only way to stop her. This led to the creation of the cross-shaped USB patch file, which allows for a drone to keep their Absolute Solver powers, but without the Absolute Solver's control over them, writing the worker drone OS to the core over the Absolute Solver itself. During these experiments, however, the Absolute Solver tried to gain control over drones like Nori and Eva, explaining how they were able to pass the Absolute Solver onto their daughters. This flashback fades to the present, where we see the scene as being watched by a worker drone core being piloted by Uzi's mother Nori. Since she has been written onto the core of her worker drone hardware, that means she has control over the core even when it's removed from her body, something usually only the Absolute Solver has control over. From here, episode 7 is an epic setup for episode 8, which is a quick rush to the actual end of the story. Episode 7 is in many ways the climax, the lowest point where Uzi turns things around to save the day. In this lowest moment, she isn't sure who to trust with Tessa now in their lives, and she ends up separated from N and the others. While separated, N learns that Tessa isn't really Tessa at all, and instead is clearly Sin pulling his strings again. To prove this, we see a flashback of Earth where N is a disassembly drone helping to wipe out humanity. As Tessa, Sin finds the files in the basement indicating which drones have the Absolute Solver and are a threat to her, after which she conveniently finds Doll as well. Sin easily destroys Doll, creating an end to her story, with her last act being to warn Uzi to fight back. Uzi ends up in a battle with Sin, but is interrupted by N and her mother Nori, during which Sin is even able to control Uzi to have her fight against N. After Uzi ends up getting control of her body back, however, we see that Sin still isn't defeated, even though she was decapitated as Tessa. It's revealed here that she was just wearing Tessa as a flesh suit, with the hopes of tricking N into thinking that he loved her, and Sentinels into not attacking her. However, after seeming to get away from Sin, Uzi and N find themselves being pulled into the mysterious pit that the Solver created long ago when controlling Nori. Uzi, wanting to save N, tries to make it so that she can sacrifice herself while he gets away, leading to a catastrophic event that nearly destroys Copper 9. Episode 8, Absolute End. The finale picks up where episode 7 left off, with us seeing the fallout of Uzi's choice to fall into the pit. This causes a mass destruction event where Copper 9 begins to fall apart. Uzi has managed to survive, with most characters being safe away from the damage, or just floating in space, such as Uzi and her mother Nori. Out in space, they cannot talk, but through text and scratching on rocks, Nori explains that the only way to defeat Sin and stop all of this would be to destroy Sin's heart, which contains the original Absolute Solver. Uzi is afraid she will lose control of herself, but Nori insists that it's a matter of will, and as long as Uzi isn't a little bitty, she will hold Sin off. Uzi only inherited part of the Absolute Solver patch, which made her more susceptible to the Absolute Solver's control than Doll. However, she is contented with Sin for control over her body, and Nori essentially believes that it's possible for Uzi to maintain control even while using her powers. As a program and a robot, this makes sense, as the more experience she has fighting off Sin, the better she can become at it, creating her own programming internally to essentially prevent a total takeover. After learning this from her mother, Uzi is then saved by En in his ship, where the two are able to admit their feelings to each other as they fall beautifully to the planet in flames, ready to fight Sin. This battle was rather epic in scope and had a lot of fun twists and turns in the action itself, but emotionally, it relied on the fact that the characters had been reunited and reaffirmed their feelings thanks to the previous episode. While Uzi could have easily lost this battle, it would seem, the victory came essentially as an accident where she grabs onto the heart of Sin. However, just trying to destroy the heart wasn't enough, as even in its black hole state that Uzi crushes it to, it still has the Absolute Solver's influence. This allows the black hole to extend its range to include Sin's drone corpse again, which would allow this corpse to eat the black hole heart and become Sin again. This control over this black hole seems to be how the Absolute Solver escaped with Jay in the past, and it made sense to Uzi here that the only way to really get rid of the Absolute Solver forever with this would be to eat the Absolute Solver herself. By absorbing the Absolute Solver into her after she had learned how to control her body and resist the Solver, Uzi is able to create a prison for her. This was essentially what Sin feared would happen, and why she had tried to stay so far away from the battle and hide behind disguises, because any drone who is patched that could resist her could become her eternal prison simply by devouring her heart. In the scenes that follow, however, Sin expresses being more or less happy inside of Uzi, existing as a merged personality that can sometimes show independence by retreating into Uzi's tail. In this new life, Uzi and Sin live as one entity, getting to watch anime and draw manga with En, hang out with Lizzie and V, who are the new queens of the school, and even hang out with Khan and Nori, who are hanging out again, I guess. It was a happy ending for most of the characters, though Doll was shown to still be dead, and Jay was shown to have no real connection to the others, since she decided that it was best to side with the Solver. Following a climactic battle where V tries to convince her to return to the side of good, the only thing she has left is to try and fix up the spaceship so she can leave Copper 9 and the drones behind. Uzi and En are still set to appear in animated comedy bits for Glitch and the Glitch Inn, but the actual story of murder drones reached its natural conclusion here, with everyone basically getting to live happily ever after. For most fans, this was the perfect way to end this rather short story, this 8-episode epic that managed to draw in an audience of millions over the course of a few years. For others, it felt like something was a bit missing, certain explanations on the nature of the Absolute Solver and what its bigger goals were after wiping out humans and drones. For more theories on that, however, I included a playlist of all of our Murder Drones theories down below, including a mega video where we go deep into the real-life lore that inspired the show. And while this is our last video here on Cartoon Universe for Murder Drones, at least until something new might pop up, be sure to go check out the video I'm putting out over on our other channel, Random Universe, where I rank all of the Murder Drones characters. Link in the pinned comment down below, and see you guys in the next show.